The words hit me before I even finished reading them. Jada Williams, your position is no longer required. 3 lines. 3 words. Like a punch straight to the chest. My pulse skipped. The city outside blurred through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of Redwood Global's Midtown Manhattan office. Horns blared. People shouted across streets. But all I could hear was silence. My knuckles burned white as I gripped the edge of the polished conference table. Trying to ground myself. Trying to remind myself that this couldn't be happening. I had spent years building my place here. Every night, every weekend, every sacrifice. All of it meant to secure my future. To give my daughter Leila the life she deserved. And now, in less than 10 seconds, it felt like it had been erased. Damian Whitaker, the CEO, a tall, perfectly poised man with a smile that never reached his eyes, stood on the other side of the glass partition. He didn't need to look at me. The words had already landed. And yet, he lingered, calm, detached, sipping his coffee, like he was savoring some private victory. I wanted to speak. I wanted to defend myself. To explain. To scream. But my throat refused to cooperate. My voice had been silenced before it ever left my lips. All I could do was stand there, frozen, as the ripple of quiet laughter reached the back of the room, soft. Stifled. But it cut deeper than any yell could. I had practiced for this presentation for weeks. Every line, every slide, every question, I had rehearsed until my own reflection in the dark apartment windows looked back with sympathy. But no rehearsal could prepare me for this moment. No script could shield me from the humiliation of being erased. I backed out of the room slowly, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a metronome marking the rhythm of my unraveling. My badge wouldn't work. My name had disappeared from internal chats. Every door that had once opened for me was now just a locked barrier. And with every step, I felt less and less like the woman who had walked through these halls with confidence. Who had turned impossible deadlines into triumphs. Who had commanded the attention of global clients from Atlanta to London. By the time I reached the elevator, my hands were slick with sweat. I pressed the button for the lobby. Watched the numbers descend slowly, tortuously. Each floor that passed was another reminder that my life here had shifted irreversibly. Once I was out on the street, the city felt alien. Midtown Manhattan, usually alive with energy, now seemed like a backdrop to a personal nightmare. I walked toward the parked car, the hum of traffic in the distance failing to reach me. In the driver's seat, I rested my head against the wheel, the leather cool beneath my forehead. Leila, my 8-year-old, with a laugh that could melt the sharpest edges of any day. My reason for late nights. Skipped birthdays. Every compromise. I had promised her a world of possibilities. A life built on the sacrifices I made. And now, what could I promise her? I thought about calling my mother back in Atlanta. The warmth of her voice. The smell of cornbread. The pride she always had in her daughter. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not when pride would turn into pity. Instead, my phone slid onto the passenger seat. Forgotten, while silence pressed heavier than the night around me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost its meaning as I sat there, staring at the skyline. My reflection in the windshield stared back like a stranger. Mascara smudged into shadows beneath my eyes. Hair unkempt from the tension of the day. Blazer wrinkled from the morning's struggle. Harper Lane. No. Jada Williams. The name sounded foreign in my mouth. Like Redwood had stripped me of not only my career, but my very identity. And yet, amidst the despair, something flickered. Not hope, not exactly. It was fire. Small, defiant, alive. A spark that whispered, they can erase me from Redwood, but they cannot erase me from myself. I pulled myself together, hands shaking, and opened my laptop. No code, no equations, just words. Fragments of ideas, the essence of Project Helios. The work that had been mine from the start but had been twisted. Buried, or claimed by others. The hum of the fridge. The distant city traffic. The soft scratches of keys against the keyboard. It was nothing like the sterile labs of Redwood. But it was mine. I wrote for hours, the city lights shifting outside, tracing patterns on the walls of my apartment. I wrote for Leila. I wrote for the colleagues who had quietly watched injustices unfold and done nothing. I wrote for myself. Each word felt like reclaiming a piece of the life they had tried to steal. By noon, I had a plan. Not foolproof, not polished, but real, something I could stand behind. Something that could no longer be silenced. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in a community hall in Brooklyn. The kind of space where local tech enthusiasts, developers, and activists gathered, laptops scattered, coffee cups in hand, energy raw, alive, no polished boardroom, no intimidating glass walls, just people, curious, hungry for something real. I held my leather folder tight against my chest, heart hammering like a drum in my ribcage. I could turn back. Nobody here knew me. Nobody expected me to speak. But I remembered Leila's voice, ringing in my mind. Mom, are you working again? Yes, I was. And this was the work. I stepped forward under the fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, reminding me of Redwood's labs, and cleared my throat. My voice shook. Hi, I'm Jada Williams, and I've been working on something I believe could change the way we think about technology. The room fell quiet, some polite, some skeptical, and then, a voice from the back. She's right. Another followed. Why haven't we heard this before? Heads nodded. Phones came up to record. The energy shifted. For the first time since Redwood, I wasn't invisible. Not really. Not anymore. And for the first time in days, I felt it. The thrill of defiance. The spark of control returning. My words, my ideas, my presence, they mattered again. And so, the first page of my rebellion had been written. The first public act of reclaiming my voice completed. And the world, for all its noise, had begun to listen. The week that followed my Brooklyn talk was a whirlwind. My inbox flooded with messages, some from people I had never met. Others from former colleagues who had witnessed the silent injustices at Redwood but had stayed quiet out of fear. Each message carried its own weight. A combination of gratitude, encouragement, and shared frustration. I could feel it building. A current that had started as a small spark in that dimly lit community hall, now threatening to become a wildfire. But Redwood did not sit quietly. Damian Whitaker's name dominated news feeds, internal memos, and whispered conversations. Threats followed me across emails, through social media, even in casual calls from potential partners. They wanted me to be scared. They wanted me to retreat into the shadows. I didn't. The night before my second public talk, I sat at the small kitchen table in my apartment, Leila asleep in the next room, her soft breaths like a metronome against the chaos outside. I rubbed my temples, letting the memories of the first presentation flood me. The nervous stutter, the sudden silence, the disbelief in some eyes, the warmth of recognition in others. Every emotion replayed itself with vivid clarity. I whispered to myself, this is bigger than fear, bigger than Redwood. This is for all of us. Brooklyn's community hall felt different this time. Journalists, activists, students, even some tech professionals from Silicon Valley who had heard about my first speech filled the space. The chatter hummed with anticipation. But beneath it was something more, a collective energy. Ready to witness, to respond, to empower. I gripped my leather folder, feeling the embossed nameplate, Jada Williams, under my fingers. It was more than a folder. It was a vessel of truth, of work, of late nights, sacrifices, and resilience. The room quieted as I approached the stage, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above, casting long shadows that mimicked the challenges I had faced. I paused, let the silence stretch for a heartbeat longer than comfortable. Let it be heard, let it matter. Good evening, I began, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. My name is Jada Williams. 2 weeks ago, I was erased from Redwood Global. Today, I'm here to speak not just for myself, but for every person whose voice has been silenced. The room leaned in, eyes fixed, phones poised, some skeptical, others hopeful, but all present. I spoke of nights hunched over code, of algorithms designed without empathy, of ideas claimed, rewritten, buried. I spoke of colleagues who feared to speak, of women and men whose brilliance went unrecognized, of single parents, of students, of communities pushed aside by systems that claimed to serve everyone equally but never did. I paused, let the words land, The hum of fluorescent lights. The scratch of pens. The quiet intake of breath. Each became a drumbeat of accountability. This is bigger than any one company. I continued. It's about power, representation, and the courage to demand justice. We cannot let silence become the default. We cannot let fear dictate our future. A hand shot up. A young man, hoodie pulled low, asked softly, "What can we do?" I looked at him, really looked, and felt the fire inside me flare. We stand together. We speak. We document. We demand transparency. And most importantly, we support each other. Every voice matters. Every story counts. Change doesn't come from isolation, it comes from community. The room erupted, not in loud applause, but in a unified, resonant murmur. People nodded, whispered encouragement. Some even cried quietly. This wasn't just my victory. It was ours. The media coverage afterward was explosive. Clips of my speech circulated rapidly. LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, even local news channels. Comments poured in. People identifying with my struggle. Expressing solidarity. Offering resources. Some called me brave. Others, bold. But for me, the most important thing was the connection. The realization that Redwood's shadow was not infinite. It could be challenged. It could be exposed. And then, the call I had been dreading. Redwood's legal team. Ms. Williams. The voice was calm, professional, deliberately neutral. Your actions constitute multiple breaches. We recommend ceasing all distribution immediately. I let it hang in the air, not because I was scared, but because it confirmed that my words, my actions, were impactful. They feared truth. They feared exposure. I looked around my apartment later that night, at the quiet glow of my laptop, at Leila's drawings scattered across the counter, at the faint scent of pancakes still lingering. I knew this was bigger than lawsuits, threats, and potential retaliation. This was about integrity, about setting an example, about showing my daughter and the world that standing up, even when it's hard, is worth everything. I began planning the next phase: community meetups, workshops, even a small online platform for tech professionals to share experiences, document injustices, and support each other. My network expanded daily, fueled by people who had been silenced, underestimated, or overlooked. Weeks passed, and momentum built. The second public talk drew a crowd twice the size of the first. Faces familiar and new, journalists eager to report, students taking notes, colleagues who had once stayed silent now standing beside me. The energy was tangible, a force more powerful than fear. I took the stage, hands steady, heart racing in rhythm with the collective pulse of the audience. Tonight, I said, we reclaim our voices, not just for ourselves, but for every person who's ever been told they weren't enough. We are visible, we are powerful, we are heard. Heads nodded, phones recorded, cameras captured the intensity, but nothing could capture the heartbeat of the moment, the fire in the room. The unity, the defiance. After the speech, people came forward, sharing stories, offering support, and connecting in ways I had never imagined possible. I realized then that empowerment wasn't just personal, it was communal. It was lifting others as you rise, holding space for voices that had been silenced, turning private pain into public change. Redwood didn't stop. Damian Whitaker and his team escalated threats, tried to discredit my credibility, and applied pressure through corporate channels. But the tide had shifted. The narrative was no longer theirs to control. Every speech, every post, every shared story reinforced the movement. I wasn't just Jada Williams, the fired engineer. I was a catalyst, a spark, a rallying point for those fighting injustice within corporate America. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, I felt empowered, not invincible, but grounded, connected, purposeful. I knew the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges, but I also knew that silence was no longer an option, not for me. Not for Leila, not for the community I was helping to build. That night, as I tucked Leila into bed, her small hand clutching mine, I whispered, "We are going to keep fighting. Together." Her eyes, wide and trusting, reflected the same spark I felt in myself, a spark that would not be extinguished. And in that moment, I understood. This story, our story, was not just about corporate revenge. It was about resilience, justice, and empowerment. It was about rising, even when the world tries to push you down. And the next morning, as sunlight spilled into the apartment, I opened my laptop with resolve. Emails, messages, and calls awaited, but for the first time, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt alive, ready, determined, and unstoppable. Because the fight wasn't about winning a battle against Redwood anymore. It was about proving that truth, courage, and community could outshine fear, oppression, and silence. And I knew, this was just the beginning. The morning air in Brooklyn had a crisp edge, sharp enough to wake even the most stubborn of city dwellers. I stood on the rooftop of my apartment building, coffee in hand, watching the sun illuminate the skyline. The day felt electric, loaded with possibility, but also heavy with anticipation. Today, I would confront Redwood, not just their policies, not just their executives, but the very system that tried to erase people like me. The phone buzzed incessantly. My team, small but fiercely loyal, sent updates, journalists confirming interviews, community leaders arranging live coverage, social media accounts buzzing with support. Every notification was a reminder. The world was watching. And so was Redwood. I walked to the venue for the final hearing. A sleek, glass-walled auditorium in downtown Manhattan. Its polished floors reflecting the tension in the room. Damian Whitaker and his legal team were already present, their confident smiles thin and forced, like masks slipping under the weight of scrutiny. I took a deep breath, let it fill my lungs, steady my nerves, let the silence stretch for just a moment, before the storm. The hearing began. Redwood presented their usual litany of violations and breaches. Their words, rehearsed and sharp, were meant to intimidate. I felt the old familiar surge of fear, but I replaced it immediately with focus. With empowerment, with clarity. When my turn came, I stepped forward, shoulders squared, chin high. The room seemed to shrink, every eye drawn to me. Cameras clicked, journalists scribbled notes, and my community, streaming live, watched in real time. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, voice calm but piercing. I am here today not just to defend myself, but to challenge a culture that marginalizes voices like mine. Redwood Global boasts of innovation, diversity, and inclusion. Yet, my experience, and the experiences of countless others, tells a different story. I let it pause, let the silence hang, heavy and meaningful. The board shuffled uncomfortably. Damian's fingers tapped impatiently on the table. I have emails, documented conversations, and witness testimonies. I continued, clicking through a presentation on the screen behind me. Each slide detailed moments of unfair treatment, idea theft, and systemic exclusion. This isn't personal, it's systemic. And until we acknowledge it, until we hold people accountable, the same pattern will continue. Not just at Redwood, but across corporate America. A murmur ran through the room. People shifted in their seats. Some took notes. Some exchanged glances, recognition, understanding, validation. I could feel the momentum building. I shifted my tone, more passionate now, letting emotion thread through the logic. I stand here because I refused to be invisible. Because I refused to let fear dictate my future. Because I believe that every professional, especially Black professionals, deserves to be seen, heard, and respected. And we will not stop fighting until justice is served. Heads nodded. Some audience members clapped softly, then louder, until the room resonated with energy. Outside, my community watched live streams erupt with messages of solidarity. Twitter hashtags trended. Hashtag justice for Jada. Hashtag corporate accountability. Hashtag Black excellence. Damian's usual composure faltered. His jaw tightened. His team scribbled frantic notes, trying to respond, trying to regain control. But the narrative had shifted. I wasn't just Jada Williams, the former engineer. I was the face of change, the voice for the silenced. When the board called for deliberation, I stepped back, breathing deep, heart pounding. Every second felt like an eternity. Yet every second affirmed my courage, my resilience, my strategy. Finally, the verdict came. Redwood would publicly acknowledge the failures, implement new oversight policies, and fund community programs for marginalized professionals. More importantly, they would reinstate my position with full acknowledgement of my contributions, and a public statement validating my experience. The room erupted. Tears streamed down my cheeks. But I held them back, savoring the gravity of the moment. My community, both in person and online, celebrated not just me, but the triumph of truth, persistence, and courage. After the hearing, journalists crowded around. Questions, cameras, flashes, an overwhelming symphony, but I was ready. I spoke candidly about empowerment, resilience, and the importance of standing up for yourself. This victory, I said, isn't just mine. It belongs to every person who has been doubted, dismissed, or undermined. It's proof that change is possible. That courage can shift systems. That community is strength. The next weeks were surreal. Invitations for talks, interviews, panels, and collaborations poured in. I traveled across the country, speaking in conferences from Atlanta to Los Angeles, sharing my story, mentoring, and empowering others to claim their voices. The movement grew, not just a story of one woman, but a collective of professionals demanding accountability, fairness, and representation. One evening, after a particularly emotional panel in Atlanta, I sat alone in my hotel room, reflecting. Leila's voice echoed in my memory. "Mommy, you always fight for what's right." I smiled, thinking of the ripple effect, young black girls and boys seeing themselves in me. Feeling emboldened, inspired. The fight wasn't over, it never is, but the path had shifted. The impossible had been made possible. And as I looked out over the city lights, I understood. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't personal gratification. It was reclamation, empowerment, legacy, the fight for justice, equality, and dignity, not just for me, but for every professional who dares to dream bigger, fight harder, and rise stronger. I whispered softly to myself, "This is just the beginning. And we rise together." The morning sunlight spilled through my apartment blinds, brushing Emily's hair in gold. I hadn't slept well. My mind kept replaying the courtroom. The murmurs of Redwood employees who had finally found their courage. The faces of colleagues who once ignored me now leaning forward with hope. And then it hit me. My fight wasn't just about me. It had never been. I opened my laptop and began drafting a proposal. Not for a lawsuit, not for a press release, but for something bigger. A mentorship program for Black professionals navigating corporate America. Especially women like me who knew the sting of erasure. I wanted them to know, you're not invisible. Your voice matters. And yes, you can fight. Emails went out cautiously at first. Friends from past jobs, former interns, even that young software engineer who'd whispered, "That's what we've been waiting to hear," at the tech meetup. Each message carried curiosity, hope, a little skepticism, and then came the responses. Short notes at first, then paragraphs, then pages of stories. Stories of struggle, of subtle discrimination, of ideas stolen or dismissed. Each one reminded me of my own journey. Each one added fuel to the fire burning quietly inside me. I scheduled the first mentorship session at a small community center in Atlanta, its walls covered in colorful murals. A stark contrast to the sterile glass towers of Redwood. Chairs lined the room, laptops flickered awake, coffee brewed in the corner. I watched the attendees arrive. Young women in bright blazers. A few men with nervous smiles. All carrying the weight of ambition tempered by experience. I felt a tremor in my chest, not fear, but recognition. This was the beginning of something I had always imagined but never dared to call real. I cleared my throat, heart pounding in rhythm with the low hum of fluorescent lights. "Hi, I'm Jada Williams," I began, voice steady but warm. "I've been where some of you are, thinking your work doesn't matter. Worrying your voice isn't enough. But it is, and together, we can make sure no one erases it." Heads lifted, eyes wide, I paused, letting the words settle, letting the gravity of that moment sink in. A young woman in the back raised her hand, voice trembling. How do you keep going when it feels like the world is against you?" I smiled softly. You find your fire in unexpected places. You surround yourself with those who lift you, who challenge you, who refuse to let you give up. And most importantly, you lift others as you rise. The session flowed naturally after that. We spoke about networking, about navigating bias in meetings, about asserting ideas without fear. I shared stories, not the polished versions of me the world expected, but the raw, real Jada. Trembling hands at my first big presentation. Nights spent staring at the ceiling wondering if I was enough. The moment I realized I could turn shame into fuel. By the end of the session, the room was buzzing. Laptops clicked, pens scribbled, voices shared. One young man lingered, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I've never had anyone like you tell me I matter," he said quietly. "Not like this." I felt a lump in my throat, one I refused to swallow down. This, the connection, the spark, the recognition, was what I had been fighting for all along. Not revenge against Redwood, not headlines or victories, but this, real people, seeing themselves reflected, empowered to act. Over the next weeks, the mentorship program grew. Emails from across the country poured in. Chicago, NYC, Los Angeles, Houston. People shared their stories, their fears, their triumphs. I connected them with each other, creating a network that spanned cities, industries, experiences, and in every message, every Zoom call, every small meet-up, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The fight I had begun for myself was no longer solitary. It had become collective. One evening, after a long session, I sat in my car outside the community center. Emily asleep in the backseat. The hum of traffic around me felt distant, inconsequential. I stared at the steering wheel, remembering the woman I had been a few months ago, frightened, silenced, unsure. And now, the fire inside me burned differently. It wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every young professional who had been overlooked, every voice that had been silenced, every dream deferred. I whispered her name, almost like a promise. "This is for you, Emily, for all of us." And in that quiet night, I realized something essential. Empowerment was contagious. Courage, shared, multiplied, and for the first time, I felt the weight of my journey shift, not into exhaustion, but into purpose. The morning air in New York had that crisp edge that made you feel alive and exposed all at once. I stepped out of the car near the Brooklyn Community Hall, folder clutched tight against my chest, heart hammering like it wanted to break free. Today wasn't just another mentorship meeting. Today, I was stepping into the public eye, and the spotlight wasn't polite. Inside, the hall buzzed with anticipation. Students, young professionals, local journalists, all eyes turned toward me as I approached the podium. Cameras clicked, phones lifted, social media was already streaming the event live. My pulse raced, but beneath it, there was a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. I had a mission: to hold Redwood accountable, and to show every Black professional in that room that they didn't have to wait for permission to claim their space. I cleared my throat. "Good morning," I began, voice steady. "I'm Jada Williams. A few months ago, I was silenced by one of the largest tech companies in the world. But silence isn't the way forward. Not for me, not for any of you." There was a pause, a ripple of tension. I let it linger. The audience leaned in. "I'm here because corporations, even in 2025, still try to erase voices like ours." I continued. "Voices that work twice as hard, stay twice as late, and dream twice as big. But the truth is simple. We cannot allow that erasure to continue. And we won't." From the back, a journalist lifted her hand. "Jada, are you worried about legal consequences? Redwood has already sent cease and desist letters." I looked toward the cameras, toward every young face in that room, and smiled faintly. "I've been scared," I admitted, voice low but firm. "But fear isn't a reason to stay silent. If anything, it's a reason to speak louder." The murmur in the room grew. Phones captured every word. I could feel the momentum building. Each sentence I spoke, each pause I allowed, was a spark catching fire in the crowd. I shared Redwood's practices, the subtle dismissals, the credit stolen, the system built to overlook people like me. I named specifics but framed them within the larger picture: fairness, accountability, reform. By the time I concluded, heads were nodding, voices whispering affirmations, and journalists scribbling notes furiously. One young woman at the front mouthed the words, "Thank you." Another man whispered, "Finally, someone said it." Outside, the social media storm was immediate. Clips of my speech were shared and reshared, tweets, reels, Instagram stories. Within hours, the story caught the attention of national outlets. The narrative was no longer just about one fired engineer. It was about systemic inequity. About corporate America being held accountable. Redwood didn't stay quiet for long. By the afternoon, their legal and PR teams were in damage control mode. Press statements labeled my speech misguided and reckless. Their lawyers hinted at further litigation. And anonymous online accounts resurfaced, questioning my credibility. I expected this. I had prepared for this. I wasn't here to win friends. I was here to spark change. The next public panel, held in Los Angeles, drew a larger crowd: students, tech professionals, activists. I faced Redwood executives in a moderated discussion broadcast live. The tension was palpable. The cameras captured every stiff smile, every calculated glance. I felt their presence like a shadow pressing down. But I refused to let it dictate my words. When the moderator asked, "Why should the public care about internal corporate disputes?" I looked out at the audience, my eyes landing on a group of young black women scribbling notes. "Because these disputes aren't internal," I said. "They shape lives, careers, families. And when companies ignore accountability, it's not just a boardroom issue, it's a societal one. Every policy, every decision has a human face. And I refuse to let those faces be ignored." The room shifted. The energy changed. Redwood executives were uncomfortable, their rehearsed confidence cracking under the weight of truth. Questions poured in from journalists and audience members alike. Each answer I gave built momentum. Each revelation sparked conversation. By the end, the room was not just listening, they were moved, motivated, engaged. And outside the panel, the impact rippled wider than I could have imagined. Local news stations covered the story. Influencers amplified the message. Conversations ignited across corporate offices nationwide. People called to thank me, to share their experiences, to pledge their support for reform. It wasn't victory, not yet. Redwood remained a giant, their influence pervasive. Legal threats still loomed, and some doors were already closed to me. But for the first time, I realized something essential. Change didn't need my permission. And it didn't wait for complete justice. Change could begin the moment we decided to speak, to stand, and to demand accountability. That night, as I sat with Emily on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, I whispered, "We made a start today." She looked up, eyes bright with innocence and pride. "Mom, you're brave." I hugged her tight, and for a moment, I let myself believe it. The fight wasn't over, but the momentum was ours. The morning sunlight hit the streets of Atlanta in streaks of gold and fire, cutting through the haze of tension that had hung over my life for weeks. I parked my car outside the downtown conference center, the same one that Redwood had booked months ago for a private strategy meeting. Today, it wasn't private. Today, the world was watching. I clutched my folder, the edges worn from hours of pacing, rewriting, preparing. Inside, evidence of everything. Emails, screenshots, internal memos, witness statements, every piece a shard of truth I would wield against a giant. As I stepped inside, the media swarmed. Cameras, microphones, live feeds, the kind that turns hearts racing into a public heartbeat for millions. Every flash, every question, demanded composure I didn't always feel. My pulse thrummed, but I held my chin high. I was Jada Williams, and for too long, Redwood had tried to erase me. The boardroom, massive, glass-walled, sleek, had been transformed into a public hearing setup. Journalists lined one side, activists another. The other side was reserved for Redwood's executives. Faces tight, smiles brittle, hands fidgeting beneath polished suits. Damian Redwood himself sat at the center. The same cold, calculated expression I remembered from months ago. He thought he could intimidate me. He thought I would fold. I walked to the podium. The microphones captured every step. My voice shook only once. A flicker. Before I steadied it. "Good morning," I began, letting the pause sink in. Letting the room lean toward me. My name is Jada Williams. And for months, I've been silenced, erased, and dismissed. Today, that changes. A ripple of anticipation. Cameras zoomed in. Social media feeds buzzed. The tension in the room was palpable. I'm not here to debate. I continued, pacing slowly across the stage, letting my gestures punctuate the words. I'm here to show proof. Proof of how Redwood disregarded ethics, ignored voices, and attempted to claim work that was not theirs to claim. This is not revenge. This is accountability. And accountability is overdue. I began displaying the emails, screenshots, memos, one by one. The evidence painted the story. How my ideas had been copied. My hours of work rewritten under another name. My warnings ignored while the project advanced recklessly. The audience murmured. Journalists leaned forward. Redwood executives shifted uncomfortably. Damian Redwood raised an eyebrow. Voice calm but brittle. Ms. Williams, this is selective interpretation. Context is necessary. I didn't falter. Context, I said, voice firm, does not erase truth, and truth is what people deserve. From the audience, a former colleague, quiet until now, stood. I can confirm every word she's saying, he declared, voice trembling, yet firm. I was there. I saw it happen. Others followed, each testimony stacked, like dominoes of truth toppling Redwood's carefully constructed facade. The media captured it all. Live commentary, tweets, live streams, news alerts. Within minutes, the story went national. Redwood's narrative was no longer theirs alone to control. Public momentum had shifted. Social media users championed Jada Williams. Black tech professionals, students, and advocates began sharing their own stories. The hashtag accountability now trended coast to coast. Redwood attempted to interject, to downplay, to intimidate, but every word I spoke, every witness I presented, pushed their credibility further into the shadows. The room, once heavy with tension, now pulsed with energy, support, and empowerment. I could feel it radiating through the crowd, through the cameras, through the very walls. Finally, I paused, letting the room absorb it. The silence was heavy but expectant. I looked out at every face, every camera, every young black professional watching from home, and said, we cannot wait for change to come from those who profit from silence. We must demand it, we must embody it, and we must never allow our voices to be erased. Applause erupted. Some stood, some cheered quietly, some simply nodded, absorbing the weight of what had just been declared. Damian Redwood's face was tight, almost unreadable, but the boardroom's power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. I stepped back, hands steady, heart pounding, feeling a rush of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months. Control. Influence. Impact. Not from a title, not from a paycheck, but from the undeniable power of truth, courage, and visibility. After hours of testimony, presentation, and cross-examination, the public announcement came. While courts would take their time, the board acknowledged procedural oversights. The media confirmed Jada Williams's story as verified, and activists and shareholders demanded immediate reform within Redwood's corporate structure. Public pressure surged. The company, once untouchable, had been publicly exposed, and it was only the beginning. I left the conference center into the crisp evening air, my phone buzzing nonstop with supportive messages, media inquiries, and words from those inspired by my fight. I walked slowly, letting the moment sink in. It wasn't perfection. Redwood still existed, still had power, but I had reclaimed something infinitely more valuable: my voice, my credibility, my agency. At home, Emily waited, her eyes wide, her smile proud. I scooped her up, holding her tightly. "Mom," she whispered, "you did it." "I did," I said softly, kissing her forehead. "But we did it, for all of us who have been silenced." That night, I sat by the window, looking at the city skyline, thinking of the fight ahead. Corporate reform wouldn't be instantaneous. Redwood would resist. Change would demand persistence, courage, and community. But I knew this. For the first time, my story wasn't mine alone. It had become a beacon. And as long as we had our voices, no giant, no Redwood, could erase us. Because empowerment isn't given, it's claimed, and tonight, we claimed it. Sitting back in my apartment that night, Emily asleep beside me, I reflected on everything: the humiliation, the silence, the battles, the moments I thought I would break. The truth hit me with quiet clarity. Power isn't held in titles, office doors, or boardroom walls. Power lives in courage, in persistence, in refusing to let anyone erase your voice. The lesson is simple but profound. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Your fight matters. Systems may try to silence you. Giants may try to intimidate you. But truth, courage, and community are forces no company, no person, can permanently erase. And here's the call to action. The part where you step forward. Share your story, even if it feels small, even if you fear judgment. Visibility fuels change. Support those silenced. Stand with colleagues, friends, and peers who face injustice. Empowerment is contagious. Hold systems accountable. Ask questions. Demand transparency. And push for equity. Change starts with accountability. Mentor and uplift. If you've climbed the ladder, extend a hand. Representation and guidance create generational impact. To everyone watching, take a moment today to speak your truth. Challenge unfairness, or support someone who is fighting to be heard. Every step matters. Every voice counts. Every action builds momentum. Because just like Jada Williams, you can rise, reclaim your power, and inspire a community. And when you do, the ripple goes far beyond yourself. It shapes the world for those who will follow. Remember, the giants can try to silence you, but your voice is stronger than any wall, any contract, any threat. Stand tall, speak loud, and refuse to be erased.